Before we begin this Thursday evening address, if you're not already subscribed to this YouTube channel, hit the subscribe button now and click the bell icon so you can be notified when a new video posts. Also, if you're already subscribed, make sure that YouTube hasn't unsubscribed you. Seems there's not a week that goes by that I don't get a number of people telling me YouTube decided to unsubscribe them without their permission. And of course, be sure to give the video a like. The white supremacists hate that. Now, that said,
the point of police reform is not to actually resolve the problem of police violence, but to resolve the outrage over police violence. It diffuses the anger and lets this police department return slowly to what it's always been. And I mean always been.
What's being masqueraded as police reform is not police reform at all. First of all, you can't reform a white supremacist, which is what the real problem is. And secondly, they're not putting punishment on the books. You don't see anyone talking about punishment. Just a bunch of empty talk about compiling some databases and a few feeble recommendations about use of force, but nothing about prison time. A chokehold ban means nothing. The question is, do you criminalize it? The NYPD had criminalized chokeholds over a decade and a half before Daniel Pantaleo murdered Eric Garner. The country is talking about abolishing the police and defunding them, treating them as the terrorists they are, and the powers that be are shook. So what you've seen the last couple of weeks is, while the white media has been pretending that, we're going to cover these protests, what they've really been doing is trying to lay the groundwork for how they were going to undermine them. And as with Black Lives Matters a few years ago, and as with Me Too and a number of other initiatives the white supremacy tries to use for the sake of controlled opposition, you notice that they're using elements from the LGBT community to be their stalking horses on this, and that is no accident. White supremacy's back is to a wall right now. They have to get people off the idea of abolishing the police or defunding them. So we see this high-profile fraud taking place right now. White power sees the public is ready to punish the police themselves and not even looking to be going to DAs and judges in courtrooms. The public has made it official. The enforcement arm of white supremacy is not legitimate. And since they're not legitimate, that means they can be destroyed. So you see the move to defund and even abolish them. Ultimately, unless you want to have open-armed soldiers in the streets forcing compliance with all these white supremacist edicts, laws, you instead have to find a way to persuade the people to agree to let the thugs in blue and the corrupt prosecutors and judges behind them run things. Because right now, the nation is on a slippery slope. The police have been delegitimized, and the prosecutors are next. Because it's only a matter of time until people point out that the DAs have refused to prosecute the police. The lie that it's the law, you see, the law simply won't wash. Hiding behind Supreme Court rulings, that's a rhetorical trick that has run out. It's not effective. No one's buying it. No one cares. Prosecutors have been refusing to prosecute. That's the problem. And they've been using the secrecy of the grand jury process to bury what are ordinarily slam dunk convictions. And when their attempts to try to bury the prosecution if the grand jury fails, the prosecutors and state attorney generals will try to derail the process by working as de facto members of the defense. They will help impanel trial juries who they know are not going to convict. They choose individuals during the voir dire process who they can look and say, oh yeah, this guy, he definitely is against a conviction. He's definitely against it. Yeah, this is the guy we want. Just like they did with the Bill Cosby trial. They'll help to suppress evidence, conceal testimony that will put the thugs with badges in prison, and of course the judges who decide to arbitrarily overturn lawful verdicts because they don't like it, or they assign no punishment at all. So the entire judicial system, fully 1/3 of the government, is on the verge of being rendered completely illegitimate by the public. We are on the cusp of the public turning its back on a crucial part of the government. This is what happens when the people recognize that an institution is biased, corrupt, and cannot be fixed. Today, they're saying defund the police. Tomorrow, they're going to be saying abolish the prosecutors and the judges as well. And what means will the government have to force any sort of compliance with the laws? When white supremacy says, I'm white and I say so, there have to be teeth behind the say so. There has to be an or else, and the or else happens to be the thugs with badges. But what happens when the people say, our principal demand, our chief concern right now is getting rid of those guys with the guns? Then what? That's why the government can't do it. They're not going to do it. Defund the police, abolish the police department. They're going to go, we cannot do that. The police, the prosecutors, and the judges, they are going to be considered without authority. You can't have a government without a mechanism to settle disputes and to punish lawbreakers, but that only works as long as the people agree to abide by whatever the police, prosecutors, and judges do. If people grumble about police brutality, if that's all they do, just grumble about it and make some complaints, but they don't refuse to recognize the authority of the police, if the people do not refuse to comply with the police, then all that grumbling and complaining doesn't mean anything. If they complain about prosecutors who selectively prosecute black people and don't punish these race soldiers at all, but they never stop allowing the prosecutors to continue persecuting them, then their complaints mean nothing. If all they ever do is complain about judges who deliberately ignore the law in order to railroad innocent black people into prison and give the harshest sentences they can while simultaneously reducing or even throwing out verdicts and punishments against thugs with badges who they know to be guilty, if you don't make it clear that you will no longer recognize these judges' authority, then your complaints about them are meaningless. And that's the reason why what's been happening the last few weeks has been so important. Laws ultimately mean nothing. They're just words on a page. What gives the law any authority is whether or not the people go along with it. Do they obey what those words on the page say? And do they also obey what the thugs with badges say? So while the white politicians are putting on this little political theater, pretending as if they're so concerned about police reform, when the truth is they're not really actually talking about anything, people are saying punishment. They're using the right words, punishment. And you got these legislators who are trying to talk around it. They figure they're going to use weasel words. We're talking about holding police accountable. We didn't say accountable. We said punishment. The punishment has already been spelled out. Everything from second-degree murder to capital punishment. That's what punishment means. It does not mean any piddly 5 years. That so-called Eric Garner Anti-Chokehold Act, that's a joke. But of course you have to have the white media attempting to give legitimacy to this fraud, trying to palm itself off as reform. The goal is to maintain the status quo. That's what's going on here. There is no argument between the Republicans and Democrats. They're both on the same page. They know exactly what they have to do. They're, as usual, controlled opposition, pretending to be bickering when the truth is they're trying to wear you down and hopefully move on to something else. The American people have an extremely short attention span. And you got both the left and right arms of the political fraud of white supremacy who are hoping to play on that. They're hoping that, well, sooner or later, you guys will move on to something else, right? Let's talk about the coronavirus. Oh, coronavirus. Oh, there's coronavirus is really spreading across these states. You got the white media doing everything it can. Let's talk about Donald Trump. Let's talk about John Bolton's got a book. Let's talk about the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker. Ooh, there was a dust up on the Chinese-Indian border. They're trying to change the headline. Because what they realize is if they can't, then what's going to happen is there's going to be changes forced on the society. Either the politicians will ultimately be forced to have to actually put real punishments enshrined into law, or the public is going to look and say, hey, the punishment of the police is going to come down to the public themselves. There's going to be punishment one way or the other. If they cannot change the subject, if they cannot get the people distracted. And that's what they're working overtime to try to head off. That is their number one priority right now. It's to get the people to stop demanding something other than the status quo. That's what they're doing. The people are saying, we're not going on with the status quo. We haven't up until this point. this is wrong. We're not going to continue like this. We don't necessarily have a firm idea what's coming next or what it is that we do want, but we damn sure know we don't want what's going on, and we're not going to have anything that even looks like it. The white media is trying to figure out, well, how do we stall you guys out until you eventually resign yourselves to the status quo, till we wear you down? So you tell them that you're going to institute changes, but these changes don't change anything. But you tell that lie, you tell your allies in the white media to push that lie hard as they can, see if the people are gullible enough to buy it. You're trying to reassert control and influence over the people because right now they're not listening. So you pretend to be hearing what the people say. You start off your sentence with an insincere mention of police brutality, and then you immediately pivot to talking about anything other than. Let's talk about LGBTism. Let's talk about feminism. Oh, well, the police, this is about police brutality in general. See, the white media is pursuing numerous ways of saying all lives matter. There's a lot of ways to say that phrase. When they try to talk about everything except for the black victims of white supremacist violence, that's all lives matters talk. When they start bringing in LGBT anything, let's talk about LGBTism, homophobia, transphobia, that's all lives matter talk. When they say that, well, this is actually about police violence in general, you look at how the U.S. is in comparison to Europe. We ain't talking about in comparison to Europe. Well, when you look at just police violence across the board with all ethnicities, we ain't talking about across the board with all ethnicities. We're talking about the black one. This is the white media attempting to bring in all lives matters under a different wording. They figure if they change the wording, you won't notice. And I need you to notice. If they ain't saying black, that means they're trying to change the subject. Full stop. Oh, we got to stop the public from calling for punishment. Instead, let's use words that don't mean anything, like accountability. See, everybody knows what punishment means. Punishment means prison. Accountability means nothing. Accountability. That's more white supremacist weasel words. A phrase so vague and meaningless that it can mean whatever you want it to mean, but the one thing it definitely isn't going to mean is a hard prison sentence. Something has to be done now to prop up the enforcement arm of white supremacy. The white powers that be understand they need something big and flashy, so they're putting on this pathetic political theater, this feeble spectacle where you get a lot of the same politicians who were telling you what they can't do. All of a sudden they're saying that they're listening and something needs to be done, though they're all very careful to make sure that they don't say what that something's going to be, and they definitely don't say anything about punishment. Well, it's about accountability and oversight. Well, what does accountability mean? Well, we're going to have a federal database where we keep count of how many black people they kill. And also, there's going to be additional money for retraining and additional money to the police. That's what they're talking about, giving money to the police departments. Well, of course, nothing is actually going to be done other than more guns for the thugs with badges, because God knows they don't have enough. This is all meant to get their propaganda in front of as many people as possible so that you can't miss it, so that everybody sees it, and then they'll wait. That's what they're doing right now. They're waiting to see if the people agree to let the thugs with badges and corrupt civil servants go back to brutalizing them and violating their rights. Have you guys fallen for the scam yet? Have you gone for the propaganda? Are you guys ready to quit the uprising and we'll go back to seeing if the police will do any differently? Oh, they've gotten the message. See, they've got in front of the cameras and said they got the message. Why, you had some of the thugs in the NYPD who have been kneeling in front of the crowds. Well, that's because they're scared of what the public will do if they don't. Oh, well, you're going to trust them now. They've turned over a new leaf. Oh, they hear you now. Say they certainly hear you. This ain't about hearing us. It ain't about obeying either. This is about punishment. This is not a police accountability movement. This is a police punishment movement, full stop. This is not about retraining or reforming, because you can't retrain or reform a white supremacist. This is not about keeping count of how many innocent black people they kill. This is about making sure that they get punished whenever they do. Who runs the society? You see, there's a power struggle going on right now. Oh, a long time ago, one of those old dead slaveholders said, "Is this to be a government of laws or a government of men?" Well, we already know what the answer was. Thomas Jefferson answered that one. It's a government of men, white men. And that being the case, there is no such thing as law. White supremacist fiat, the old "I'm white and I say so," that's not law. And white supremacist control is not order, but that's exactly what you have in the US, law and order, otherwise known as white fiat and white control. So now what's happening is you got people who are saying for the first time in this country's history, there's going to be law and order. Law and order means that everybody has to play by the same rules and you'll get punished one way or the other. That makes it where everybody is going to be equal, which is exactly what white supremacy has been fighting a 500-year-long war to avoid. And I got to get you to start using the right words. Some people say that, oh, these politicians and these civil servants and these government officials who are over us, politicians and civil servants are not over us. In fact, it's the opposite. We are the ones who are over them. The only thing that they have power over, or the only thing that they're supposed to be over, are the governmental and procedural apparatuses that we put in place for the sake of regulating the society. But a lot of people, some of these church folk, I guess, they refer to these politicians in much the same way that you referred to priests in the Old Testament. And you're wrong on both counts. The entire reason for having a government is supposed to be A, so that the people can get what they want and need based on the resources of the land, and B, convenience. Instead of me taking care of the day-to-day matters of the state, instead, you choose some representatives, and they're the ones, a dedicated group, who will take care of all of that governmental state structure, maintaining the state for us. You farm it out to them so that the people can focus on acquiring and building what we want and need. Could I run the government myself? Sure. But I got other things that I would like to be able to devote my energies to. And it works if you have people who are dedicated to their friends and family and neighbors, if they're dedicated to their countrymen. But on the other hand, if you have a white supremacist fraud, well, no good can come from that. These apparatuses are in the hands of white supremacists who are using these very institutions to prosecute a race war against us. We're trying to reason with them. We've always tried. That was a mistake. Remind them of what their own laws say, and their entire MO is to ignore the law. As far as they're concerned, I'm white and I say so. Whatever I say, that is the law. It can be one thing on Monday, something else on Tuesday, and go back to a completely different thing on Wednesday. But unfortunately for them, we, the black media, we've reminded the people that the only law is whatever the people are willing to obey. If the people say the police are illegitimate, then that's it. They're done. And now they're afraid that the people are going to turn their anger towards the prosecutors and judges who have also worked hand in hand with the thugs in blue to derail punishing them time and time again. But the politicians are also afraid of something else. A threat beyond delegitimizing the police, prosecutors, and judges. See, if the people who enforce the law are illegitimate, then the laws themselves are also illegitimate, as are the people who write and pass those laws. That's the problem that they're facing. As long as the people were apathetic and resigned themselves to let the corrupt and the racist and the violent and vicious just do whatever they wanted, it didn't matter. You can write whatever laws you want. It does, it's a game that you play with certain special interest groups. It matters to them because they're having their own little private behind doors tug of war, but it doesn't matter to the masses because the masses have just basically thrown up their hands and said, there's nothing we can do. But when somebody reminds them, no, you can do something. You can bend these bastards to your will. Then all of a sudden it's a problem. Because you see, those words on a page doesn't mean anything if the majority of people look and say, you know what, we're just not going to follow it. And what are you going to do? You don't have enough cops to shoot all of us. And the police are not the only ones who are armed. And that being the case, you're not going to be able to just show up and say, well, I got some thugs with badges and guns. Well, this is the United States. Everybody's packing heat. The only thing that gives the police any authority is whether or not the people are willing to submit to that authority. And when you have a critical mass of people who say, we will not, guess what? The cops have no authority. They're finding that out the hard way in the streets. You know, the last time this country was at a crossroads like this was the Civil War. Now, they managed to hold things together that time, but this scenario is radically different. You see, it's not a few inbreds from the sticks who are fighting for some right to own black people. This time it's the former slaves who are coming for their freedom and their wealth and their power that was stolen from them. They're coming to take it. See, I told you about how Tucker Carlson was on his insipid little Fox show, and he was telling you exactly what the real problem was that he had. He told you exactly what the issue was. He said, you notice that he was talking about the black grassroots. I dare not give any credit to that BLM organization. But he was talking about the black folks in the streets. He was talking about how they were able to force the issue of defunding the police and force the issue on the politicians without an election. That was the main thing that Tucker Carlson focused on. There's been no elections that have been held. You didn't get any candidate on the ballot who did this. You did not get any laws passed, no ballot initiatives, no voter referendums, nothing. This was done completely and thoroughly without an election. This was done outside the ballot box. And what Tucker Carlson said about that was, you notice they didn't need a team of lawyers to get it. They're not trying to convince you of anything. And that is telling that he would use that language. Now, that's a case of him actually saying exactly what his fear is. That's the problem. The problem was that they didn't do it the way the white supremacy said you're supposed to. Yeah, you can go into a courtroom that's completely and thoroughly owned top to bottom by white supremacists, and that way they can go ahead and tell you all the reasons why you should not have what the law you fought for says that you should have. Oh, well, here's the reason why we're not going to do it, and you just need to go home now. What happens is, say, forget it. We're not bringing any lawyers. We don't need any lobbyists. This is what it's going to be. And no, we're not trying to convince anyone of anything, because power is not given, it's taken. Power does not take an opinion poll. Power does not ask permission. Power does not hope that you're fine with it. Power does not take anyone else's concerns or anyone else's feelings into account. Power simply moves. And they're not used to the former slaves doing that. See, everybody else has the right to do that. Everybody else, they don't have to concern themselves with what black people think. Black people's opinions, black people's lives are completely worthless. You can just trample all over them. It doesn't matter. But now when black people start doing the same thing, oh, this is a constitutional crisis. This is an existential threat. Well, you're right on both counts. This is a constitutional crisis because the Constitution says black folks are not supposed to have anything at all. And we're making it where, well, that piece of paper you got in Washington don't mean a damn thing to me. And it is an existential crisis for white supremacy. Black empowerment is the end of white supremacy. Our rise is their fall. And we're not waiting to see if the Democrats will bring us somebody who we will have to drag them kicking and screaming just to even get them to talk about what is in our interest. We're not going to wait to see if they'll give us some clearly insincere weasel words where they talk around what it is that we want while never pledging to actually do it. No, what's happening is that people are saying, you know what? We're going to force our will on the powers that be. And it's working. The thugs with badges and these crooked politicians, they're being put to the test right now, whether or not they got any authority, and they're finding out they have none. And you know another constituency that's also being put to the test? All of these white supremacists out here who have been spending decades telling themselves how tough they are and talking tough about how, well, it's these authorities who are protecting these black people. You better be glad these cops are here. You niggers better be glad these cops are here. Oh, what they would do if the police weren't there. You know, Jason and I have been telling you for over a decade now. The major reason why the white supremacists were able to run roughshod over the Black Wall Street was because the Black Wall Street had a music store, it had a grocery store, it had a furniture store, but none of the Black Wall Streets had a gun store. If those Black Wall Streets had been ready and prepared to defend themselves, they'd still be standing today. How do we know this? Look what the white supremacists are doing today. They got better weapons than they had 100 years ago, and yet we got the bastards on the run. And we ain't out there with assault rifles. What does that tell you? We are here saying abolish the police, and the white supremacists are begging the police to stay on post. As the white supremacists saying, you guys can't leave. We need you. Yeah, they do, because that's the only thing that's been protecting them. And the white supremacists know that. These little pencil neck geeks, these little keyboard Klansmen talking tough from behind the safety of a internet connection. These guys, they don't want that smoke. You had the 4chan racists, when they finally decided to come out from behind hiding in their chat room, they wound up running for their lives. And you saw what happened the last few weeks. You had Grandpa Archer. I like to call him Grandpa Arrow instead of Green Arrow. This idiot, he tried pulling some stupid stunt. He got his butt whipped and they torched his car. Man, a good time was had by all. And then you had the would-be Dallas swordsman. That dude's lucky to be alive. If he wasn't so stupid, he would have been fine. But, you know, when you're a white supremacist, that means you're certified stupid. And as we all know, there is no cure for stupid. So there you go. But the white supremacists showing exactly why it is that these guys got those back the badge and Blue Lives Matters bumper stickers. Because that's them basically begging for mercy. We need these guys to help make sure we get away with our little sneak cowardly attacks. What's happening now, people are like, you know what? We know who the world these white supremacist assailants are. We know who they are, and we already know. We've been through this drill enough times to know that the police are in on it. These guys happen to be nothing more than the forward element of white supremacy. The Dylan Roofs and the 4chan terrorists and such, these guys are the irregular forces of white supremacy. They're the ones who don't wear uniforms. But we understand, okay, this is what we're up against. We will deal with them on even terms. And what's happening is the white supremacists are showing that they never had any heart to begin with. It's like I've been telling you for over a decade now. If we fight, we win. It's only when we don't that we die. We fight and we win. It's just a matter of black folks believe in throwing a couple of punches. White supremacy backs up a little bit and we're like, okay, we declare victory. The white supremacists need the police to protect them from black empowerment. They need the police to cover for them and to refuse to prosecute them. And that works as long as black people play by those rules. But soon as push comes to shove, they're singing a different tune. Like with Alex Jones. He was the poster child for calling the government a police state. That was his favorite phrase, wasn't it? And saying that the police are an overbearing gang of brutes. And decrying all the legal powers and equipment that the police have got. Well, his rhetoric was put to the test when the anti-black racism movement began. When people began to actually challenge the police's power, when people said, hey, let's abolish the police, let's defund the police. All of a sudden, Alex Jones went from the police have too much power to saying back the badge. That's where he went from. He went from this is a police state to back the badge. So no, these white supremacists, they don't want that smoke. They are as cowardly and weak as their white supremacist ancestors, though Europeans couldn't win a spitball fight in Africa in 1,000 years. They had an uninterrupted string of failures whenever they called themselves trying to head into Africa. That is, until the advent of gunpowder. And let me rephrase that. The fact that the European had gunpowder and the African did not, that's the only thing that made European imperialism possible. Gunpowder alone wasn't enough. He had to have a monopoly on it, and you find that across the board. Why is it that you've had people who have been willing to allow the police to get away with brutalizing them and even killing them? Because the government depends on a monopoly of force in the hands of a select group who are given carte blanche to do that. That's the reason why that whole qualified immunity thing, of course they were going to give the police carte blanche and a license to kill. Of course, you have to do that when you have a police state, when you have a corrupt state, when you have a repressive regime. Of course, you have to do that. The police have to be given a license to kill. That's an automatic. You have to do that. There's no two ways on that one. But what happens when the people decide they're not going to play along anymore? You see, the real threat here is this is not an issue that's going to be going away with a Republican or a Democrat in the White House. Now, perhaps in the 60s, you could pull the Richard Nixon ran on a law and order platform. There were a lot of things going on that got Richard Nixon into power. He was also hinting all along the way that basically he was going to get the U.S. out of Vietnam. That law and order thing, the white media is trying to play up certain aspects that play to whatever narrative they want to say. But the truth of the matter is, even if you want to believe what the white media tells you, this is not going to be a matter of an election's going to solve this or have any impact on it. What's going on here is happening regardless of political party. What you are seeing is the delegitimization of white supremacy's governmental institutions, starting with its apparatus to enforce its rules on the society, to force people to have to just live with being killed at random anytime the police decide they want to murder someone and they get away with it. When the people say, you know what, we're not going to abide by that, we will not accept that, and that law is not going to be obeyed, now you got a real problem. Because if they're going to disobey the guys with guns, what do you think is going to happen when they look at these overweight, fat, pale judges and politicians? And not to mention their non-white bootlicks, what do you think is going to happen when the public looks at them? So the white media's got to find a way to trick and persuade and cajole the people into standing down. And that's the reason why you see this concerted effort across the board by the white media to carpet bomb you with all of these images and fake made up stories, telling the masses that all of this empty, useless posturing and speech making that you see politicians doing, as if this is actually them doing something about the problem when they're not. They know exactly what the public wants. What they want to see is a raft of legislation saying that from now on, if the police lay a hand on you, that will be treated as second-degree murder. If you kill someone or if they die in your custody, that is first-degree murder automatic. And if we find that you've got a Confederate flag t-shirt, or we find that your online social media presence shows that clearly you have an anti-black bias, we find anything like that, now it gets upgraded to a capital murder charge. See, that's the reason why they're so angry with what's going on in Atlanta. Because what they're used to is they're used to seeing DAs who toe the line. But that DA in Atlanta, even if he's doing it just for show, they're furious about it because as far as they're concerned, this sets a dangerous precedent. See, Dr. King said that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, but the opposite is also true. Justice anywhere is a threat to injustice everywhere. I think I told you before about how when the Romans first invaded Britain, you had one instance where you had a Roman general who said when they saw that there was Ireland just to the west, they looked and said, well, we got to go and take that place too. And one of his commanders was like, well, why do we got to do that? I mean, we just got through getting our hands on this thawed out ice box up here, Britannia. Why do we need to go start another fight with those guys over there? What's important about it? A little tiny island? Why waste our time? Why should we do that? And the Roman general's answer was, because unoccupied people would give ideas to occupied ones. See, that's exactly what oppressors and would-be tyrants have always known since time immemorial. You cannot have the people who you're oppressing and who you are subjugating see an example of freedom and see an example of people who are not living like that, because that makes them look and go, well, that's what I ought to, hey, I want that. That's what I should have. And what's going to happen is they're going to start giving you problems. So you got to make it where you control everything they see. They cannot see an example of people who are not subjugated and people who are not oppressed, because they might start thinking that maybe that's the way they ought to be living and they ought to stop their oppression. And that's what the white media is attempting to do. You can't have people getting the idea that they're going to institute an order where they're not going to be just preyed upon with impunity. The white media is not about to tell the public that any police who don't like the standards that the public is demanding shouldn't have a badge. That's what the conversation should be. The white media should be saying that across the board. Look, this is government of, for, and by the people, or so we were told. And if the people say, hey, this is the way the law enforcement has to be, then that's the way it is. And if you don't like it, you're just going to have to resign. Well, I guess they're just going to have to leave because the public has spoken. For better or ill, this is what democracy is. The people say what they want, and that's the end of it. There's not a conversation about, hey, once we look at what the people are demanding, the police need to adjust to the demands of the people. This is going to be a new form of law enforcement. They need to adjust to it. Instead, no, the white media is putting forward, well, this is going to be risky. Well, are they really sure what they're asking for? That's what they're doing instead. Remember what I've always told you? The only time that the media ever mentions public opinion is when it's something that the white media agrees with. If the public says, or if there's a poll released saying what the white media wants to have amplified, then they'll say, oh, the public poll today says that they trust the police and Black Lives Matter, all this police punishment stuff. The public's not with it. Why 67% of Americans are against these anti-police violence demonstrations. That's what they were saying a few years ago. Today, the numbers are flipped, and the white media gave it a one-and-done one-day mention, and they haven't mentioned it since. Now, what's that tell you? Yeah, when they think they got something they can run with it, they think that they can take something that the public allegedly said and run with it, then all of a sudden, public opinion, well, what the public has said, Jeffrey Toobin, remember? Well, the public just trusts the police. They trust police officers, and what can you do? Yeah, as soon as the people make it clear, we're saying what the white media doesn't like, and there's too many of us for you to ignore, all of a sudden the white media falls silent. They're not trying to reinforce or amplify that message. This is about using weasel words and doublespeak in order to wait out the uprising, in order to try to stall people and see if the people are going to revert back to waiting to see if these corrupt politicians will do their jobs this time. Hillary says that stop and frisk was ineffective, but she never says that it was illegal and wrong. That's weasel words. That's doublespeak. Kamala Harris and Cory Booker prattle on about accountability, but neither one of them says a word about increasing and expanding the laws to put police in prison. They don't say anything about removing all of the unconstitutional legal immunity that prosecutors have hidden behind as their excuse for why they shouldn't have to indict a thug with a badge who committed murder or assault. Family, don't let this political theater going on fool you. If the Democrats or Trump or anyone else was really serious about so-called police reform, then they would be campaigning on it. They would be telling people, I'm running on a campaign of 25 to life for police who commit assault and life in prison for any police officer who kills someone or if you die in police custody. They would be making that a plank of their political platform, but they're not. Biden's already gone on the record saying he is not in favor of defunding the police. He wants more money to go to police departments. In other words, let's reward them for killing black people. That's what he says. He does not say, you know what? I am not in favor of defunding the police, but I am in favor of cutting federal aid to them. We're just going to cut them off, period. Because they've already got all this high-tech weaponry. So we've clearly gone too far in that direction. They just need to make do with what they got. Instead, it's like, no, we need to give them more money. And we'll say that it's for training and such. You know, it's going to be, they need better training. Yeah, but the training is only going to take the form of more guns. It's going to take the form of more military equipment. It's going to take the form of more thugs with badges getting hired. That's what it's going to take the form of. What it will not take the form of, however, is any sort of substantive punishment for any police officer who harms a black person. That it will not take the form of. And by the way, Biden's refusal to defund the police, exactly the same as Donald Trump. He and Trump are on the exact same page. So when it comes to the police, there is neither air nor light between Biden and Trump. And there's neither air nor light between the Democrat or Republican parties. Neither one of them is putting forward any sort of political platform that says we are going to run on a platform of punishing the police. There's nobody who is putting together I know this is going to date me a little bit, but a contract with America style 10-point pledge. If you give the Democrats back control of the Congress, if you vote us back into the White House, if you give us control of the Senate, give the Democrats control of the executive and legislative branches, and this is what we're going to do to put those cops in prison. Nobody's doing that. Nobody's spelling out what's going to be done to punish the police. No political platform pledges. No promises being made. Instead, they're having a pretend argument about, well, you should do this. We don't want to do that. Well, the Democrats and Republicans both have a plan. Yeah, and neither one of their plans say anything about punishment. This is a distinction without a difference. And you don't see anybody in political circles or in the white media calling out any of these politicians on that. What does that tell you? This is an across-the-board effort to try to redefine these non-actions and all of this word play and all of this word salad and all of this hot air to try to say that this is doing something when they know damn well it's not. This is about stopping any sort of punishment from coming into bear. This is not about bringing it about. This is not about debating the merits of it. It's about stopping it. That's the mission. As far as they're concerned, the white media has made it clear. In their world, if they can help it, there will be no scenario where punishing the police is going to be an outcome of this uprising. All of the public outrage is not supposed to end with the police being punished. No one is putting that on the table except for the black media. And so you got the white media who's attempting to figure out how they can hijack the issue. They can bring in some phony baloney spokespeople. Let's talk about something else. See, there's many ways to say all lives matter. And there's also many ways to try to disrupt and undermine this uprising from within. MSNBC, the same network who allowed Mika the Bigot Brzezinski and Joe I'm Not a Murderer Scarborough to defame the murder of Tamir Rice, they have been leading the charge to try to change the subject. They're trying to force the national focus away from punishing anti-black violence and instead try to get it on something else. And that being the case, they're trying to shoehorn everyone they can, particularly the LGBT community, into the issue. And we're trying to move it away from black, and we're trying to bring as many other people into it as possible. Now, they're not going to be talking about punishing anti-black violence. They're just going to be instead saying, well, what about transphobia? And what about homophobia? And everybody's affected by police violence, don't you know? And that's the point, to dilute the conversation, put up some white noise. Make it where everyone gets to speak on the issue, because if everybody gets to speak, then what that means is you can just say any stupid thing you want, and soon we're just fighting to keep the conversation on target, and that's the point. The point is try to muddy the waters, try to make it where you have so much arguing going on just to keep the conversation on topic that, well, that's what it happens instead. You're not talking about the issue of punishing anti-black violence. You're instead trying to just get people to talk about the issue, period. Hey, stop it with the distractions. That's fine. They'll take that. Long as you're not talking about punishment anymore. So for the last 2 going on 3 weeks, MSNBC in particular, though CNN is just as guilty of this, but MSNBC has been putting on LGBT activists. And hey, it's Gay Pride Month. It's June, Gay Pride Month. And because of that, well, doesn't the LGBT community have something to do with anti-black violence? Well, if you're going to be talking about black people who are going to be getting legal protection, well, you can't leave out the LGBT community. You got to have them in there too. So they bring on these LGBT activists and spokespeople, put them in front of the camera, make sure that they're black, by the way. And don't mention the racism in the LGBT community. We're not going to talk about the white supremacy and the bigotry in the LGBT community, why it's all one big happy movement there. And these LGBT activists, they're going to be the ones to do the white media's bidding. They'll start off saying, oh, there were some black people who were killed. And it's just like what happens to the LGBT community. Oh, really? The police are gunning down homosexuals and transgender people? Well, no, but there are people who discriminate against LGBT people, and well, that's just like what the police do with black people. It's all discrimination. That's All Lives Matters by another name. That's all they're doing. Anytime the subject of anti-black violence comes up, well, you got to put an LGBT person out there to say, oh, this is just like what happens to us. Why, there was a transgender who was discriminated against for a job, and that's exactly like what happened to George Floyd. It's the same thing. Why, it's all the same, It's all mistreatment, and it's all inherent bias. And if only there was retraining, and that's what they get them up there to do. That's the point. It's a matter of we're not putting on any of these troublemakers, especially not the ones in the streets. Have you seen the white media talking to any of the people in the streets? I'm not talking about the real ones, not the professional mouthpieces who they always put the camera in front of. They're not. Oh, but they will bring those LGBT folks. They're going to have them in front of the cameras. They're not out in the streets. They're not getting anything done. But that's the point. This is about changing the focus. They will say that they're going to do us coming up next on MSNBC. We're going to have a segment about police anti-black violence. But as soon as their segment starts, they have 3 LGBT people on the panel. And not one of them is going to be talking about anti-black violence. Instead, it's going to be all about transphobia and homophobia and social acceptance for what you do in the bedroom. That's what the conversation becomes. And this bait and switch by the white media, it's no different than saying all lives matter, because that's what they're doing. This is all lives matter by the back door, pun intended. So we got to make sure we call this stuff out. We're not going to have anybody trying to dilute or divert the conversation. You're not going to have it where the white media tries to give itself permission to bring in other people who will not be talking about what the issue actually is, because the white media is trying to figure out how do we stop that conversation altogether. White supremacy does not want anyone talking about their crimes against us. And by blatantly ignoring our issues and shamelessly telling us that job discrimination against transgender people is just as important as a dead black man in the streets, we see that white supremacy has created multiple ways of saying all lives matter, and that is not okay. This is just another form of anti-black racism. And that's what this stuff needs to be called out as. We're talking about black people being murdered in the streets, and you bring in some LGBT people to tell me about the local pride parade? That is anti-black racism. Instead of saying, well, everybody's concerns matter, Instead of doing that, you got these LGBT types who the white media trots out. They just skip the preamble and get straight to saying, well, here's everybody else's concerns. Here's everybody else's issues and interests. They just go ahead and dispense with the whole preamble about, well, everybody's got concerns, It's like that's what they're doing. They think that they're slick. And you got to call that stuff out. This is about one thing and one thing only: anti-black racism. This is not about anti-black trans racism or anti-black feminist racism or anti-black environmentalist racism or anti-black anything else racism. It's just anti-black, period. And if somebody gets in front of the cameras and there's supposed to be a black person talking about this, but the first thing they start bringing up is all of these other groups and other lifestyles and biracial and intersectional and all the rest of it, then that's somebody who's pulling an all lives matter shtick. That is anti-black racism. And you need to call that out for it. You see, I began using that phrase anti-black racism years ago, and I wasn't the first to use it. I'm not sitting here saying I coined that phrase. I wasn't, but I wanted to make sure when I transitioned to using that term in particular, I did it because I wanted to be specific. White supremacy may tell you who the perpetrators are, but it doesn't tell you who it's directed against. You dilute and water down the message and make it a vague fog when you just use the term racism because you're not being specific. What's going on here is a hell of a lot more specific than that. Saying racism by itself allows all these other groups who have aided and promoted white supremacy to turn right around and claim that any small nitpick that they've got with the dominant society, why, that's just as important as slavery. That's just like Jim Crow and lynchings and segregation and the prison industrial complex, all the things that only black people have been subjected to. Why, you got some Asian person who says that their father had to go to Manzanar back in the 40s, and why, that's the same thing as slavery and lynchings. I understood the need to be specific. When we talk about our issues and interests, we have to make it crystal clear we're talking about black interests, black issues. And we will not allow anyone to change the subject. We're not going to allow the white media to shoehorn anyone else into the discussion. You want to know why it is that the LGBT community isn't in the streets and they're not rioting? It's because they don't have to. All they have to do is go to City Hall, go to Congress, or go to their state legislator, or go to the courts, and they get what they want. They always have. The white media, which has a large number of LGBT people who are on-air talent, Don Lemon, Rachel Maddow, Anderson Cooper, Robin Roberts, will be here till 5 in the morning. And yet these individuals who are also the vast majority of television producers and editors and studio executives and such, there seems to be an emotional neediness at work that makes it where they need to be constantly reassured. They want some sort of social validation. And as far as they're concerned, they want to make sure that they give themselves a pat on the back because that's what it amounts to. This week's Supreme Court ruling didn't reaffirm, it did not establish anything. It simply reinforced and reminded people of stuff that was already on the books that everybody already knew. It was basically just another victory lap for the LGBT community. And what purpose does it serve to reinforce and restate something that's already there? What do they think that they were accomplishing? It wasn't changing anyone's mind. It's a matter of, and this happened during Pride Month. I guess that's the reason why they were getting all happy about it. Maybe it was the timing. I don't know. But one thing that I do know is that while the Supreme Court was busy basically giving the LGBT community a pat on the back for what I'm not sure, and while they were also declaring that DACA is legal so all the illegal aliens' children can stay, what the white media didn't tell you is that this exact same week the Supreme Court refused to hear any of the numerous cases regarding qualified immunity. You guys know what qualified immunity is. That's the legal concept that basically says that the police cannot be sued whether they kill you or assault you or what have you. They should be immune from any sort of prosecution. The Supreme Court had a number of cases that they were supposed to hear, but they threw them out and said, we refuse to hear any of them. Now, I want you to think about that. In the midst of a global protest against anti-black police violence, why would the entire white media focus on an LGBT ruling and an illegal alien ruling that didn't mean anything, but totally ignore the Supreme Court's refusal to take on the legal concept that allegedly keeps police from being sued for harming black people? This is the very core of what's going on right now. This is the single most important legal issue going on right now. The country has had a number of riots and social upheaval take place in the last couple of weeks because of this very issue that the prosecutors and judges and lawmakers try to hide behind. You would think the white media would be all over it. Instead, they ignored it. It was before the Supreme Court this week. And the white media ignored it. Because they know where this conversation leads. The police have been delegitimized. All that's left is to delegitimize the prosecutors and the judges. Now, the Supreme Court refusing to hear any cases on qualified immunity, that's the court's way of saying that Congress, they're going to leave it up to Congress to decide what to do about it. But as we all know, first of all, Congress is gridlocked on a number of issues right now. But even without that, the Republicans and Democrats are both on the same page where qualified immunity is concerned, because this is their primary legal argument, their primary legal rationale for violence against black people not being punished. Why, we can't do anything about it. Qualified immunity, don't you know? And I know that a lot of you are going to also point out that qualified immunity first started off as applying to politicians first. That's just icing on the cake as far as the corrupt scumbags in Washington are concerned. But yes, qualified immunity started off applying to politicians and was later in the 80s expanded to involve the police. And that just lets you know the politicians have no interest whatsoever in doing anything about qualified immunity, so they're putting on a show. The Democrats will say, oh, what about that qualified immunity thing? And you'll be going, yeah, they're going to talk about qualified immunity. And the Republicans will say, we're not touching qualified immunity. And the Democrats will say, oh, how unfortunate. But you notice that none of the Democrats are running on a platform of vote for us and we give us control of the Congress, give us control of the Senate. Only thing standing between us and qualified immunity going away is control of the Senate. Give us control of the Senate and we'll get rid of it. No promises being made. That ain't going to be part of their political platform. If it's so important, shouldn't it be? And the white media is not bringing up this inconsistency either. This is a concerted effort to sustain qualified immunity. That's what's actually going on here. They're trying to preserve it. The Supreme Court knows that Congress isn't getting any substantive legislation regarding the police passed. Hell, they're not getting any substantive legislation regarding pretty much anything passed. The Supreme Court knows that it would be the end of the judiciary if they tried to uphold it. They can't uphold qualified immunity. The Supreme Court understands how devastating that would be for them. So what they're doing is they're making a desperate bid to buy time. When Tucker Carlson was talking about how the black activists in the streets, they were not using lawyers and they weren't trying to persuade anyone, what he was doing was he was giving a blatant admission that the legislators and the courts are irrelevant. Things can be done without them, and they don't want that becoming habit forming. They don't want the people thinking that they're supposed to be able to shape the laws. You know, that whole government of, for, and by the people, what that means is white people who own land without debt. If you're part of that 1% white elite, those are the people they're talking about. Damn sure ain't supposed to be the former slaves getting any laws passed, having any impact on the system. They're supposed to be just victims of the system. They're not supposed to be able to reshape it. People have finally realized that the system isn't going to give them justice, so they're punishing the system and making it clear they won't obey any law. And the powers that be have been forced to bend the knee. Problem is, there's a big difference between bending the knee and obeying the people. You can bend the knee and still go, well, that's all I'm doing. I'll bend the knee. I'll get down. I'll bend the knee. The NYPD will do it, and the Houston PD will do it, but we ain't doing nothing else. We'll bend the knee, but that's all. No, that ain't enough. That's why I like the phrase defund the police. I like that. Believe it or not, I'm rather fond of it as a slogan because it is nice and radical. Because the white supremacists cannot afford to do that. Go ahead and demand that they do something that they cannot afford to do. They simply cannot do that. That's not something that they can afford to do and think that they're going to hold on to their power. Without the police, there is no one and nothing that the white supremacists can run to whenever they decide to pull an ambush. They have no protection from justice. Their protection has been police who refuse to charge them, prosecutors who refuse to prosecute, and judges who refuse to uphold the sentence. Get those guys out of the way, and the white supremacists have nothing standing between them and justice. Hey, next time some Karen or some other white supremacist decides that she's going to call the cops on a black person for no reason, well, you already know the police ain't coming. The cops get abolished, well, who the hell is she going to call? Well, then, you just disarmed all these Karens and such. They understand. It's like, there's something far worse than the prospect of prison or a civil fine that can happen to you if you call yourself calling the police on a black person. Once the cops are no longer there, when you know that the cops ain't coming, well, then this is going to be an issue settled out of court. You could find yourself in that position very quickly. Oh, you call yourself getting together with some of your pals and you're going to chase a black person just because they're jogging down a street in front of your house? Well, you better hope that that black person's not armed, and you better hope that their families don't figure out who you are. It's the white supremacists who keep running to the police, not us. The police are not there to protect black people. They never have. They're there to protect the dominant society and to make sure that the masses don't defy the will of the white elite. But that only happens and is only effective at the local level. If you got one person or a small group, you can control that. But what about when you got hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who have decided, well, you know what? We're tired of the status quo too. You're going to find out real fast that your 900,000 thugs with badges, they can't control millions of people in revolt. So right now, the government, the politicians are trying to pretend like they're listening to the people, when the truth is they're scared. They're scared that the people will declare the politicians and the courts illegitimate, just like we did the police. You see, when you have one part of the government that the people look at and point to as a group and say, these guys are illegitimate, that is a threat to the entire government because it's all part of the same organism. They're trying to talk a little bit like the people right now, but not too much. They're trying to get people to nod their heads in agreement first. Can we get the people to to agree with us on some small things first. Because right now, the people aren't listening to us at all. They're not going to obey us at all. So let's start off with saying some stuff that they're saying and see if we can get them to start to nod their heads. And then slowly but surely, we're going to start bringing in the BS. Oh, these police, they're murdering people, black people in the streets. Yeah. What they're doing is just so horrible. Yeah. Well, aren't you going to say that it's a crime? Well, police accountability. Well, what about punishment? Well, police accountability. They've got to be held accountable. No, we're not going for the weasel words. Because we know this scam. We've seen it plenty enough times. We ought to know it by now. You're not going to get us to nod our heads in agreement, and then once you've got us nodding our heads, here comes the double cross. They want the people to think that these phony pretend reforms that they're talking about, the white powers that be are shook right now because something significant has changed here. A big change has occurred because you had people who went to the houses of the McMichaels and to Derek Chauvin's house. They went to their freaking houses. That is a big change. Because what that means is they're making it clear. We're not going to the police. We're not going to the DAs. We already understand they're not going to do anything. But we've already made up our minds. Just because you're not, that doesn't mean that nothing's going to get done. That doesn't mean that people are going to go, oh, well, I guess there's nothing we can do. Nah, they'll go to your freaking houses now. This is a real sea change. This happens to be a shift, a real shift. Because what happens is if they're not looking to the police, if they're not looking to the DAs, that means that they're also looking at those laws and going, you know what? Maybe the law is going to be whatever the people say. That's why you got the white powers that be shook right now. They're trying to reestablish their legitimacy. They're trying to reestablish confidence. This is a crisis of confidence, not in a matter of confidence. It's a matter of there is no trust. There is no legitimacy. There is no authority. That's the crisis. The people are not scared of the police. And that's the only means that the government has to compel obedience. When you got a white supremacist system that does not punish white supremacists who commit violence, and which decides that it's going to carry out punishment against black people who are innocent, and make sure that they are punished harshly when they've done nothing wrong, when you got a system like that people say we're not going to obey that system anymore, that's an existential crisis for the system. So they have to get the confidence and trust of the people back. They got to get the people to go back to being inactive. They have to get the people to be sweet talked back into, oh, don't do anything. You guys just sit back and we'll do something. That's the reason why I'm not impressed by seeing some DAs who are talking tough or any of that stuff. No, what I want to see is punishment across the board. But I also know that these guys, what they might do is they'll go ahead and have a couple of sacrificial lambs, so they can get the people to say, oh, okay, well, hell, we showed them who's boss. Okay, things ought to be fine from here on in. Next thing you know, you'll find that they're not indicting anyone anymore. No more charges, slowly but surely. Oh, well, the grand jury didn't bring an indictment. They came back with a no bill. That's what the game is going to be, if we allow it. This is going to be the new normal. White supremacist violence will result in people who decide that they're going to be in front of your house. What's happened is the police have been corrupt and racist. They told so many lies. They lied about Tamir Rice. They lied about Freddie Gray, lied about Charlena Lyles. They just lie every chance they get. Lie about George Floyd. Just one lie after the next. Now the police have absolutely no credibility in the public's eyes. The public can't believe, because you can't afford to believe anything that they say because they lie all the time. And as a result of that, the public cannot stand them. In Mexico, the police wear masks, not because of coronavirus, but because of the fact that the public hate them so much. They don't even want to show their faces, literally. And the United States is most likely going to be going the same way. But what I'm going to need you to do is to make sure you stay on your square. The issue here is anti-black racism. Anyone who tries to bring any other subject into the conversation, they are out of order, and you got to make sure to call them out and shout them down. Recognize this stuff when you see it. This con game going on, this pretend discussion about police reform is nothing of the sort. There's only one police reform and one police reform only, and that is a long prison sentence. If you're not talking about that, then you're just selling a pack of lies, and we're not buying what you're selling.